History loves clichés. The Sultan, a formidable ruler. The Vizier, a cunning schemer. The daughter, a jewel of the harem, a political pawn in the game of dynastic marriages. Now forget all that, because the story of Mihrimah Sultan is that rare case where all stereotypes shatter into dust. Here is a character who did not fit into the system. She broke it from within. She was not merely a ruler's daughter, she was almost a co-ruler, a political operator whose networks of influence stretched across the empire, from Istanbul to Budapest. And yes, persistent rumors claimed that even her father, Suleiman the Magnificent, a man who made half of Europe tremble, at times felt not just paternal tenderness toward her, but a soul-chilling fear. Why? How did a girl born in the gilded cage of Topkapi manage to turn that cage into the command center of a vast empire? On one hand, we have the dry lines of Ottoman chronicles and financial ledgers, where her name appears alongside colossal figures, the construction of mosques, dealings with European bankers. On the other, the image polished by popular culture, particularly the series The Magnificent Century, where her character and fate are heightened to the degree of high drama. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between, but it is far more fascinating than any script. From her very first days, Mihrimah breathed the air of unprecedented opportunity and lethal intrigue, and she proved to be an attentive pupil. But her strength lay not merely in her lineage, she was the brain and the nervous center of a vast clan. After her mother's death, she essentially took the helm of the harem faction within the harem. Following the execution of her brother Shehzade Mustafa and the political chaos that ensued, she became the primary pillar of support for her other brother, the future Sultan Selim.
Her marriage to Rustem Pasha, the greatest political predator of that era, was not a union of hearts, but a merger of assets. Together, they formed a bipolar system of power. He in the sessions of the Imperial Council, she in the depths of the harem, their collective capital and influence growing exponentially. But the key point, she was never just a wife. She was a partner, and often the beneficiary. And now to the main point. What does Suleiman's fear have to do with this? Historians do not write directly, the Sultan feared his daughter, but they leave us a puzzle that assembles into an alarming picture. By the end of his life, Suleiman, the lawgiver who transformed the Ottoman Empire into a superpower, had become a suspicious, grim, lonely man. He had outlived almost all of his loyal companions and had executed his sons. And there she remained by his side, Mihrimah, a living reminder of his beloved harem, the heir to her incredible will and ambition. She knew all the secrets, all the skeletons in the dynasty's closet, all the financial mechanisms, all the weak points. Imagine the position of an aging monarch. His power rests on information and money, and his daughter influenced both these channels. She had become indispensable, and to be indispensable to an absolute ruler is the most dangerous position in the world. It breeds dependence, and dependence breeds a silent, unspoken rage, and that very fear, the fear of the one you are no longer sure of, the one you cannot command, because without her the system would collapse. Today we are going behind the scenes. We will look at her architectural masterpieces, not just as philanthropy, but as statements of power frozen in stone. We'll examine her finances as a scheme of shadow governance, and we will try to understand who she ultimately was, a brilliant manipulator, a savior of the state, or a lonely woman who paid for power with everything she had.
And so you don't miss other stories of the Ottoman Empire, from dramatic ascents to the dark secrets of the palace. Click subscribe and hit the bell, because the most important and most shocking part is still ahead. Let's go. The gilded cage in which Mihrimah Sultan was born had a concrete address, the Topkapi Palace, the harem. But for her, it was not a prison block, it was the center of a future empire. Her birth in the early 1520s is not just an entry in a registry, it was a political move, cold and precise, like the strike of a yataghan. Historians debate 1521 or 1522, a difference of a year, but the essence lies elsewhere. She was the first child born from the legal marriage of Suleiman the Magnificent and harem. In a world where the right of the eldest son to the throne could be fragmented and contested, the status of the first child of the beloved wife was not just a title, it was an asset. From the very beginning, they were betting on her. Her name was not a random collection of sounds, Mihrimah, sun and moon in a single word. It was a manifesto, a declaration. This child was a celestial body. Her name contained her blueprint. She was destined to illuminate everything. And standing over her cradle were two key figures. Her father, Suleiman, Kanuni, the lawgiver, already then polishing his empire to a brilliant shine, and her mother, Harem, the former slave Roxilana, who by that time had made a journey akin to leaping across a chasm, from concubine to the Sultan's wife. It was an unprecedented script. Harem did not merely give birth to a daughter, she began to build a dynasty, and Mihrimah was the cornerstone of that construct. The princess's childhood was a textbook on soft power and harsh reality. Yes, she was pampered, silk, pearls, an estate in Istanbul gifted at the age of 6, not for play, but as a source of income. She was a Shehzade Hatun from her swaddling clothes, a princess with her own treasury. And in the background, within the chambers of the harem, a different war raged, silent, without cannon volleys, but no less deadly. Mahidevran, mother of the elder Shehzade Mustafa and her faction, did not look upon this girl as a child. They saw her as a threat, as an extension of the ambitions of the despised harem.
Hürrem, a graduate of the school of survival in slavery and palace coups, was her chief strategist. She didn't simply love her daughter, she was preparing her. The lessons were simple and brutal. Trust only family, learn to read the stars, remember that every gift has a price and every request carries a hidden meaning. By the age of 10, Mihrimah was no longer a child. She was a project. The project of a woman who was not meant to become just someone's wife, but a pillar, a mainstay of the dynasty. The writers of the series The Magnificent Century took the historical framework and draped it in the velvet of a soap opera. Here, education is not the goal, but a decoration, beautiful, aesthetic, yet serving as a backdrop for love triangles and harem intrigues. The young Mihrimah memorizes the poems of Hafiz not for conversations with learned men, but to move her father, Suleiman. Her tears over a poetic divan and her elegant hands tracing Arabic calligraphy are visual signals to the viewer. Look how deep and vulnerable she is. Her musical talents become the soundtrack to her suffering, usually from unrequited love. It's a classic technique to make the heroine not like the others, to elevate her above the pettiness of the harem through art. But most importantly, in the series, her knowledge is reactive. It activates in response to external threats. She overhears a conversation. She uses her language skills to warn her mother, learns of a plot, composes a poem message as an encoded cipher. Her intellect functions like a spy device sewn into a luxurious gown. It serves Hürrem's aims, and later her own survival in the struggle against Nurbanu. The culmination of this image is the transformation from a clever girl into a wise but lonely woman. Her education becomes an attribute of her loneliness and longing. She does not rule through knowledge, she suffers from it. This is the tragedy of a bird locked in a golden cage, singing beautiful but sorrowful songs. The viewer is meant to empathize, not to admire her political will. Her talents make her character more nuanced, but not more dangerous. This is romanticizing taken to the absolute.
Now, let's brush off the series' dust and look at the cold, gleaming marble of facts. The real Mihrimah did not receive an education. She underwent intellectual hardening. Her curriculum in the Topkapi harem resembled the training of an elite strategist, not a well-bred lady. Fluency in Arabic, Persian, and Turkic, this wasn't for reading love lyrics by the window. It was direct access to legal primary sources, to poetry as a tool of propaganda, and to unfiltered correspondence with foreign courts. Her poetry is not a personal diary, but public diplomacy. The pseudonym Mihri, meaning son, is a statement. Her surviving verses are not about unfortunate love, but about the nature of power, duty, and the light of justice. However, few of her personal poems have reached us. Most of those we know belong to the series' screenwriters. And her patronage? It is not charity in the modern sense. It is the construction of the empire's intellectual infrastructure. The madrasas she funded produced future officials and poets indebted to her for their status. The workshops for calligraphers and scribes were in essence the equivalent of a state publishing house, controlling the flow of information. The architect Sinan, who built her magnificent mosque in Üsküdar, left a note about her profound understanding of engineering calculations. She didn't just give money, she delved into details, debated, and approved. In the series, her talents are a shield and an ornament. In life, they were an investment portfolio and scaffolding. The series shows how the world affects Mihrimah. History demonstrates how Mihrimah, using her intellect as a foundation, builds a world around herself. Why was she feared even by Suleiman? Not because he was his beloved daughter, that is precisely the series' take, but because by the middle of his reign she had become the owner of a symbolic capital that even the Padishah could not ignore. She spoke the language of the ulama, poets, architects, and diplomats. She created a legacy in stone and verse. Her network of influence through waqfs and patronage enmeshed the empire. Suleiman could execute a vizier, but he could not shut down a madrasa built with his daughter's lawful funds, or forbid the quoting of her poems. Her power lay not in weaving harem intrigues, but in legitimizing her authority through indisputable pillars: Islamic scholarship, high poetry, sacred architecture. She transformed cultural erudition into a political technology. That was what was truly frightening. Against poison or a dagger, there are guards. Against a person whose words become part of the canon and whose constructions alter the face of the capital, there are far fewer means of defense. The marriage of Mihrimah and Rustam Pasha is not a love story. It is a merger under the banner of dynasty. In 1539, a transaction is concluded where the dowry is measured not in chests but in influence, and the marriage contract is written not by a calligrapher but by Mihrimah Sultan herself. She is 17, he is nearly 40. He is a Croatian boy who made a dizzying career from Janissary to Grand Vizier. She is Suleiman's moon, his only daughter, born in purple silks. What brought them together was not fate, but the cold calculation of the Ottoman Politburo's highest league. Magnificent Century takes this dry matrix and floods it with the fire of passions.
She is in love with the dashing Bali Bey, but her father, the Sultan, like a villain from a fairy tale, gives her away to the upstart Rustem. The wedding scenes are a feast for all of Istanbul, but the bride's face is a mask of despair. The series paints Rustem almost as a grotesque, leprosy, greed, and eternal dampness in his soul. He is not a husband, he is a jailer, appointed by harem to tighten control over her daughter and consequently over the entire harem. Now let's wipe off the makeup and look at the books. The historical Mihrimah is not a romantic sufferer. Her letters to her father, preserved in Topkapi, are a masterclass in manipulation. She does not weep over an unhappy love. She complains that Rustem is sluggish in affairs, that decisions are made without alacrity. Children? Here the story becomes hazy. A daughter is documented, Aisha Humashah, Suleiman's beloved granddaughter, a link in the dynastic chain that followed. The sons are lost in the contradictions of the chronicles. Was it Mehmed, or Suleiman, or Osman who died childless?
So where lies the truth? Somewhere in the middle, at the point where ambition collides with duty. The series Mihrimah wept from helplessness. The real one probably wept only from rage when something went off plan. Her personal life was not a melodrama, but a continuation of politics by other means. Rustem was not an object of love or hatred, but an asset. His capital, financial, administrative, she used to the fullest to build herself a monument not of tears, but of stone. Herein lies the main divergence. In the series, she is a victim of marriage. In history, its primary beneficiary. She didn't merely give advice. She crafted the reality in which that advice became the only correct course. Take the story of Ibrahim Pasha, the Grand Vizier, Suleiman's childhood friend, his sole brother. The fall of such a giant seemed impossible. Mihrimah worked with precision, the girl behind the screen who memorized every careless joke of Ibrahim's, every hint of his ambition, and carefully, like a precious poison, delivered it to her mother. The result? The execution night of 1536. It was her first major political maneuver, and it was executed flawlessly. But the true scale of her influence was revealed in 1553 in the affair of Shehzadeh Mustafa. Sources hint it was Mihrimah who engineered the forgery, a letter from the Persian Shah that proved Mustafa's treason. But the genius lay not in the counterfeit. The genius was in its presentation. Mustafa was strangled in his father's tent, and the path to the throne for her own brother Selim was cleared. If anyone in the palace breathed a sigh of relief after Hurrem's death, thinking the era of female influence was over, they were sorely mistaken. A new star had risen on the political stage of the Ottoman Empire, and its light was no less brilliant. Mihrimah Sultan did not simply inherit her mother's networks of influence, she honed them to a shine, transforming them into a precise instrument of power. Her figure became the very center of gravity around which alliances were formed, and the careers of grand viziers began and ended. Mihrimah's political signature was forged early within the famous coalition of Hurrem, Mihrimah, Rustem. This triangle was not merely a family council, but a veritable shadow cabinet. Their influence was felt in the darkest corners of palace intrigue. A prime example is the fate of Grand Vizier Kara Ahmed Pasha.
This man, the Sultan's own son-in-law, seemed untouchable. He assumed the highest post in 1553, like a fireman called to extinguish the crisis following the execution of Mustafa and the temporary fall of Rustem. For 2 years, Kara Ahmed held the reins of power, but the family alliance operated in a mode of quiet yet relentless sabotage. Soon, an accusation hung in the air, as commonplace as a coin and as deadly as poison. bribery. Whispers, inspired by Rustem, reached the ears of Suleiman. Kara Ahmed was executed, and his chair, as if on a spring, was once again occupied by Mihrimah's husband. This was not merely a career twist, it was a lesson for the entire imperial elite about where the true source of power lay. With Hürrem's death in 1558, Mihrimah did not retreat into the shadows. On the contrary, she stepped into the forefront, assuming a unique, almost official position as the chief advisor and the Sultan's eyes in the capital. When Suleiman departed on military campaigns, it was his daughter who became his ears and eyes in Istanbul. She sifted through news, separating the important from the trivial, and sent her father concise, meaning-laden dispatches. There was no sentimentality in these letters, only precise data, analysis, and forecasts. Suleiman trusted her judgment unconditionally. She was an extension of his own mind in the heart of the empire. In the dynastic game, this Ottoman succession battle, Mihrimah initially backed Shehzade Bayezid, just as her mother had once done. Together with Rustem, they formed his political headquarters. However, Bayezid, inheriting his father's talent, also inherited his fatal overconfidence, ignoring his sister's counsel. His indifference to the delicate web of support Mihrimah wove for him proved a fatal error. And here, the nature of her politics was revealed, not emotional, but purely rational. Disappointment? Perhaps, but above all, cold calculation. Seeing her bet had failed, Mihrimah without hesitation switched sides, defecting to the more compliant Selim. This move turned out to be a brilliant investment. Upon ascending the throne, Selim II not only remembered his sister's support, he showered her with gold, allocating 50,000 gold coins for her urgent needs, a sign of profound gratitude and recognition of her prowess. And after the death of Suleiman, Mihrimah reached the pinnacle of her status, becoming the most influential and respected woman in the empire, first under her brother Selim, and then under her nephew Murad III. Her authority was unquestionable. Her word was law for the entire harem and carried significant weight in the imperial council. She didn't merely preserve influence, she cultivated the future. It was Mihrimah who gifted the young Murad III the concubine Safiye, a woman of rare intellect and ambition. This gift, made with far-sighted calculation, shaped the empire's internal politics for decades, linking 2 generations of female power with an invisible thread of succession. Her influence extended far beyond palace walls and internal squabbles. Like Hürrem, Mihrimah looked at the world map as a strategist. She conducted independent diplomatic correspondence, for instance, with Polish King Sigismund II Augustus. These letters were not mere requests or compliments, but documents of subtle international policy, discussing trade, border security, and the status quo in Eastern Europe. To foreign monarchs, she was not merely the Sultan's daughter, but an independent political actor with whom one had to reckon. The myths popularized by TV series depict a hysterical beauty who bends her father's will with whims and jealousy. Reality was far more cynical and effective. Mihrimah did not hypnotize Suleiman, she argued. She was his most reliable, most ruthless, and most personally devoted advisor. Why? Because their interests were sewn together by blood and ambition into a single whole. Her elevation was the guarantee of Hürrem's line continuing on the throne. She was not fighting for her father's attention, she was managing his fears. Her power was rooted in a monopoly on information. Through Grand Vizier Rustem Pasha, she controlled the divan. Through a network of clients and spies in the harem, all rumors and moods, She became the empire's indispensable communications node. Suleiman received from her not just a daughter's opinion, he received a consolidated report filtered through a lens of loyalty. When she said, Bayezid will betray, like Mustafa, it sounded not like a sister's jealousy, but like a diagnosis from the state's best physician. So why did the old sultan, conqueror of Rhodes and Baghdad, yield? He did not yield, he delegated. Mihrimah was his alter ego in a world where his access as a semi-divine monarch was limited. She could be harsh where he needed to remain merciful, scheme where he needed to appear pure. Their relationship is not a pathological romance, but the highest form of political symbiosis. He did not fear her, he feared the vacuum and chaos that could arise should he lose this perfect, terrifyingly dispassionate instrument of his will. The stones she laid in the foundations of her mosques were the same currency as the gold akçe in her chests, the currency of power. Mihrimah Sultan was not just building structures, she was erecting public monuments to her influence, and she did it on a scale that silenced even the grumpiest viziers. Her architectural legacy is not quiet, charitable foundations. These are loud, visible for miles declarations. The name upon them was not that of the Sultan, but of the Padishah's daughter. She entrusted her ambitions to the one person capable of giving them perfect form, the genius Mihrimah Sinan. Their alliance of architect and patroness gave birth not merely to buildings, but to masterpieces that still define the silhouette of Istanbul to this day. The complex at Topkapi became her diadem. It is said it was conceived as a gift or consolation for her brother, Sultan Selim II, but it emerged rather as a monument to the sister. Here, inspired by his patron's generosity, Sinan achieved the impossible. His dome, spanning over 20 meters, became one of the largest in the empire. But the true marvel was the 4 minarets, 73 meters each. Imagine that figure. They were visible from 20 kilometers away. This was not architecture, it was a cry captured in stone.
Beyond the facade of the religious building lay an entire world, a madrasa for 300 students, which rumor says even housed an observatory, a hospital that treated thousands, and a kitchen that fed multitudes. A caravanserai for merchants, which brought in substantial revenue. At the opening in 1568, in the presence of Sultan Selim II himself, the chronicles preserved her words, "This is the light to my name for eternity." Sinan was brief. Her generosity had compelled him to surpass himself. Across the empire, from Jerusalem to Bursa, she spread a network of her benefactions, mosques, hammams, fountains, madrasas. She did not merely sign the checks. Her letters to Sinan with revisions to the blueprints survive. Make the dome higher, so God may see my faith. She was the foreman of her own legend. The final years of Mihrimah Sultan were the slow burn of a torch that had illuminated the entire empire. After Suleiman's death, her power formally reached its peak, yet became as fragile as the ice on the Bosphorus in February. She remained not just the Sultan's sister, but the very prop of the throne, while the throne itself wobbled under the drunken feet of Selim II. In those 12 years, Mihrimah achieved the impossible. She became regent to an adult ruler. The chronicles preserve a striking detail. Her firmans, signed from the depths of the harem, appointed governors and executed rebels. When the Janissaries revolted in 1567, it was her command, not her brother's, that restored order. But behind every triumph stood a shadow. The shadow of her sister-in-law and chief rival, Nurbanu. The struggle between them was not a feminine spat, but a cold war for the future of the dynasty.
Yet, by the mid-1570s, the strain began to break even her iron will. Gout, migraines, sleepless nights in labyrinths of intrigue, her body began to give way. Her death on January 25, 1578, was not a sudden catastrophe, but a quiet, almost bureaucratic finale. The official cause, complications from a long illness. Though whispers of poison from Durbanu echoed throughout the seraglio, historians dismiss them. What killed Mihrimah was not poison, but exhaustion. Exhaustion from the endless game where the empire itself was the wager. Her funeral was magnificent, as befitted the sun of the world. 10,000 poor fed, 40 days of mourning. Selim declared that the light of the empire had gone out, but he dissembled. The light did not go out, it turned into an institution. Mihrimah's legacy outlived her by centuries. Sinan's mosques in Üsküdar and Edirne are not only architectural masterpieces, but monuments of political will carved in stone. Her death became not the end of an era, but a point of transition, from rule to legend, from the intrigues of the Topkapi chambers to a timeless symbol of power that makes historians argue and tourists crane their necks toward the domes of her eternal mosques.